All right, we're back here on SportsLine. We were talking before the break. By the way, phone lines are open, 737-7767. Talking about the trend over the last decade or so of guys in the NBA feeling the pressure of needing a ring to justify them as a superstar, to justify them on all-time charts when comparing players. I think we saw that with LeBron going to Miami. I think that you see it with Kevin Durant going to Golden State. They felt to validate themselves in their careers, they had to get rings, and they weren't sure they could do it where they were. So they go up and join essentially super teams to get it done. I think that's bad for the game. I think we've lost the parity in the NBA in the sense that I think we all knew it was going to be Cleveland and Golden State basically from the moment the season tipped off. So what good was the regular season? And even in the playoffs, I mean, these weren't good series. These were largely over in 4 and 5 games all the way through. It was Golden State in the West and Cleveland in the East just mowing people down to get to this final series. And we all hope that at least in the finals, you're kind of talking about 2 super teams, but really what we found out is you have a super team in Golden State that goes 16-1 in the postseason and wins this series in 5. And then you've got a second-place team in Cleveland, who's a really good team. They were the champions last year. But they're not on the same level right now as Golden State. But the problem is after them, to get to 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, you're taking a huge step down in the NBA. And then there's a bunch of teams that just can't even compete. That, to me, is a huge problem if you're the NBA. That basically you've devalued your playoffs, where you're not getting great 6 and 7 game series, and you're not really having that full drama of Cinderellas, teams being able to move on as lower seeded teams. I mean, think about this. The Predators were the 16th and final seed in both conferences in the Stanley Cup playoffs. They got to within 2 wins of winning the Stanley Cup, all the way to the Stanley Cup final against the Penguins. That, to me, is why the Stanley Cup playoffs are infinitely more interesting than the NBA playoffs. I knew what was happening in the NBA playoffs all the time. I didn't have to watch games necessarily. I just knew what was happening. I could predict them before they happened, what was going to transpire, how series were going to go, who was going to move on, and ultimately what the finals were going to look like. You can't do that in the Stanley Cup playoffs. How many people had the Predators beating the Blackhawks in round 1? I saw 47 experts, I think, going into that series. I think I saw 1 pick the Predators. How many people had them winning the conference? Nobody. How many people had Ottawa moving on in the East, or the Rangers moving on in the East? Not many. Capitals going down after another President's Trophy season. Just, there's so much unpredictability in the Stanley Cup playoffs. That makes it great. To have a team that is an 8 seed get all the way to Stanley Cup final, that's terrific for the sport. To have upsets, to have these wild swings back and forth from series to series, from rink to rink, that to me is entertaining. This NBA product where you know what's going to happen essentially before it happens, just not the same. Now, the ratings will tell you that this was like the highest watched series since the end of the Jordan era. Because you put these stars against each other, people are going to tune in. That's obvious. But I think the NBA is playing with fire here with their lack of parity with these teams. Because while I maybe will tune in for Golden State Cleveland because it's LeBron versus Steph and KD, Kyrie, Clay, Draymond, there's a lot of big names there. There's stars that you want to watch. I'm not sure if anybody's tuning in for the Portland-Milwaukee series, though. And there's a lot of other examples you can give to that. Those teams just don't have much to move the meter right now. And worse yet, when Golden State and Cleveland are playing anybody else, why would you watch that? You know what's going to happen. you just know what's going to happen. And I think long-term, that's something the NBA's got to figure out. Their stars are carrying the day right now. But at some point, if it's Golden State versus Cleveland for year and year on end, I mean, this is the third straight year, that's your final. If that's the case for several more years, I think viewership starts to decline. And I think at the same time, you're watching the Stanley Cup playoffs be phenomenal. They were tremendous this year. Game 6 on Sunday night got the highest rating in 5 years of a playoff game in the Stanley Cup. And I think a big part of that is due to the atmosphere here in Nashville, what people saw out on the streets and the fun going on. And the fact that when you watch those games, if they're tight in the third period, I mean, the other night, 0-0 game in the third period, you get under 10 minutes to go, essentially the next goal wins the game. And if it's for the Penguins, it wins the cup. And you have all these overtime games, and they're all sudden death. It is the one sport where you literally cannot take your eyes off the camera or off the TV, because if you do, you're liable to miss something incredible. You can't say the same thing about the NBA playoffs. And I think that was so illustrated this spring by these coinciding playoffs where the Stanley Cup was full of upsets. It was full of energy. You've got a team pressing like the Predators to get out from an 8-seed hole, no home ice advantage, winning games on the road, getting all the way to the Stanley Cup final for the first time ever. You have 50,000 people in the streets cheering them on, a carnival-like atmosphere around every game. And then in the NBA, you have 4- and 5-game series where the best teams are winning. There are no upsets. There are no Cinderellas. There are no real feel-good moments. And then the final series, which everybody built up of, it's these stars in Golden State against the best player on the planet in LeBron. And you did have that, but the teams just weren't evenly matched. The Cavs are easily the second best team in the NBA, but they were clearly not close to Golden State in that series. That's got to be a concern if you're Adam Silver in the NBA. All right, speaking of the Predators, tough loss the other night, the way that went down. What a remarkable run. We talked about this earlier tonight over on the news on News Channel 5. Through the first 17 seasons of this franchise, from when they started in 1998 to this point, the Predators had won 3 total playoff series. 3 total in 9 previous trips. They won 3 playoff series alone this year to get to the Stanley Cup final. Their longest individual run before was 7 wins in a single postseason. That came last year when they went all the way to Game 7 against the Sharks before losing. Never before had gotten past the second round. They won 14 games in the playoffs this year, getting to the Stanley Cup final. And in the process, they're going to hang the first ever banner at Bridgestone Arena for a team accomplishment. They won the Western Conference title. And while that wasn't the ultimate goal, that wasn't the Stanley Cup that they all wanted, it's something that they're going to be able to look up there and remember this run and remember this great scene and season by that banner hanging from the rafters at Bridgestone Arena. PK Subban never really shied to take the microphone. He talked after the game on Sunday night. You can tell with all of these guys, a bitter disappointment that they didn't win the cup, yet an understanding that this is a young team. It is a remarkable accomplishment, and the future remains bright here in Tennessee.
Yeah, you know, obviously it stings right now. You know, it's a tough feeling, and you know, being in that locker room, you know, seeing your teammates like that, a lot of tears, a lot of emotion, and there should be. I mean, we all care, and we wanted to obviously have an opportunity to play for the Cup in Game 7 in their building, and it just didn't happen for us. But I think for our team, we gotta embrace the feeling right now and accept it and let it sink in, because ultimately that's what's going to put us back here again next year and put us in a position to win a Stanley Cup.
How do you describe that feeling and emotion that's in your dressing room?
It's hard to describe. You know, when you dream about lifting the Stanley Cup as a young kid, and you know, the dreams happen probably a million times for most of us, and you know, being that close, being, you know, 2 games away and, you know, 120 minutes away from lifting the Stanley Cup, and it sucks, you know, but, you know, for us, we did so many things well, and this is such a tremendous run for our team, and we have such a young team. I think we gained a ton of experience, you know, from this run, and like I said, we have guys that haven't played many games in the NHL, let alone the Stanley Cup Playoffs, that stepped in and did such an amazing job. I mean, Freddie Gaudreau and Sissons, and these guys had Pontus. They've had some big games for our hockey club down the stretch, and listen, it's going to sting. It's going to hurt for a while.
Extra painful because of the disallowed goal.
I don't know. I mean, obviously it's unfortunate, but you know, what are you going to do? It's over and done with, and you can't look at it. At the end of the day, there's got to be a winner and a loser, and it just sucks that we're on the losing side of it.
What the flow of that game with PK, that was a tight game from start to finish, maybe different from some of the other ones. What did you think of just the...
No, we expected it to be that way. I mean, you got one team playing to win the cup, you have another team playing for the opportunity to win it, and you know, at the end of the day, it was 2 teams going at it. It was a hard-fought series, and you know, a couple bounces here, a couple bounces there, and maybe the game's a little different, but it didn't happen for us. And at the end of the day, like I said, we got to let this sink in and embrace it. And I think that for our hockey club right now, you know, the bright spot is that we got a young team, and you know, there's some guys that'll never feel this feeling again. And let's hope that the next feeling that we have is it's raising the cup over our head and being Stanley Cup champions.
You mentioned a lot of the young guys. What else did you learn about this team?
Well, just how bright our future is. I mean, I think that for our hockey club putting this team together, you know, at the start of the season, there was a lot of talk about, you know, our team in the long term with such young players, but we've proven that we're a team that can compete now and can win now, and I think that we got so many guys that, like I said, are just going to take experience from this run and use that to propel them over the off season and come into the regular season and do what we need to do. But I think at the end of the day, you know, there's a lot of guys in the league that don't understand what it takes to get here, have never been in this position before, and the positive is we know what it takes to get here. We know what we have to do, and I think we're going to take, you know, from this that we're going to have to be even better if we want to be Cup champions. And we got beat by a team that a lot of guys, that's their 3rd Cup or 2nd Cup, and they have the experience, they know what it takes to win, and I think we learned a lot from playing in the series.
What was the exchange you had with Sid on the handshake?
Nothing, just congrats and you know, congratulations on the victory. I mean, he won the Conn Smythe, so he's a great leader in this league, and he's a guy that's going to be a Hall of Famer when his career's said and done. So at the end of the day, it's you know, losing sucks, but it's a good team over there, and they got some great players, and they've worked extremely hard all year, and they've had some adversity as well, but their leadership group, you know, did a good job of keeping things tight for their hockey club and coming into a tough building, a tough atmosphere, and winning a close-fought game. So you got to give them credit.
PK Subban, Predators defenseman, after the loss the other night, you got to give him a lot of credit, too, for coming in tough shoes after the trade to get Shea Weber, the captain, to Minnesota, bring in Subban. He can't obviously step in right away and fill his void in terms of the captaincy or leadership, but man, was he good on the ice. He fought through injuries this year. In the postseason, I think he stepped up to become a leader. I think you saw what PK Subban can ultimately be for the Predators, and that is a superstar personality, full of leadership within the room and on the ice. And oh, by the way, a Norris Trophy caliber type of defenseman. The Predators are just really set on their defense core. That also includes Roman Josi. Guy's 26 years old from Switzerland. He's just been really good. And he doesn't command the same attention globally that PK Subban does, but anybody who knows hockey and watches Roman Josi understands just how good he is. The Predators are set on that blue line with Subban and Ekholm, Josi, Ellis. They're in great shape, and today they re-signed Yannick Weber, who's part of that 3rd defensive pairing with Matt Irwin, a 1-year $650,000 deal, about a $75,000 bump from where he was over the past season. So they're trying to keep that D-line intact, and that's obviously very important. You want that defensive core to be the heart and soul of this team, and it has been for a long time. It was this year. It gets much of the press clippings. It makes life easier on Pecorine. You got to keep them intact. They're certainly going to try to do that the best as humanly possible. It is going to open up an interesting question in the expansion draft because the Predators are likely going to protect 4 defensemen, which means they're really only going to have the ability to protect 4 guys up front. In terms of forwards, you know they're going to protect Forsberg and Arvidsson and Johansson. So who is the 4th? Is it James Neal? Is it Calle Järnkrok? Who else is it? Some of those guys they don't have to touch, like a Kevin Fiala doesn't have enough service, so you don't have to worry about him. Mike Fisher, if he decides he wants to play, won't sign until after that is done, so you don't have to worry about protecting a guy like him. But there's some real questions there. I mean, Calle Järnkrok, James Neal, Colin Wilson, Craig Smith. Those are the types of guys that are going to be unprotected in all likelihood. And Vegas can only take one of them, but still, that's going to be one guy that's a pretty good player that's going to be headed out the door at some point here. Phone lines are open. 737-7767 is the number. Let's go to David. David, good evening. You're first up here on SportsLine.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate you taking the call. I called last week, I guess it was, and I was asking you, and I want to tell you first off how much I appreciated you taking the time out of your show like that to explain some of these rules to me. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you know, I do appreciate that. It helped me understand it more, and I'm still reading more. I'm really wanting to get into this. But the second thing was about that puck rule. You know, he lost sight of the puck, so he's got to blow a whistle. I mean, I'm kind of thinking, whose fault is that? You know, I mean, either get enough judges or refs out there to watch every angle like they do on a football field. You got a camera. They could have used the camera, which they did, but I guess that doesn't matter. But I guess the rule is that if you lose sight of the puck, then you got to blow the whistle. Well, that took a point away. Now, whether it mattered or not, I guess we'll never know. But it, you know, I don't know. I just kind of thought that was a little crazy. You know, I'm thinking.
I think it mattered in a big way. And I think you bring up a good point. Is that by the rule they got it right because the official is instructed as protection for the goalies. If you don't see the puck, you blow it dead, assuming that he's stopped the play. The problem was here, I think he anticipated. Murray had been very good up to that point of the night. I think he just anticipated that he caught it, gobbled it up, and the play was dead. When in actuality, it squirted right through his arm from the back angle. It goes through immediately. It is laying there immediately. He just flat out missed it. And I think you've got to instruct these officials to wait a second. It's okay to wait a half a second and be sure before you start to blow these whistles. And your point of the game, it absolutely made a difference. I mean, that's 1-0 Predators. It changes the entire course and complexion of the middle part of that game into the third period. And it could have been a 1-0 game with 2 or 3 minutes to go where the Penguins are trying to pull the goalie and get the extra attacker on, and the Predators are playing defensive mode to hold on to that 1-0 lead, as opposed to 0-0, somebody's got to strike, Preds make a mistake, and Penguins get kind of a fluky goal. I won't say that call or call individually cost the Preds the series or even that game, but man, it would have played out differently. And when you have a rule like that, my biggest beef of it is, you know, this isn't college basketball or the NBA or something where you're talking about possession or something where you have 200 possessions in the game and maybe they don't get it right and you lose one of them. That's bad. But you have the time to make it up with 198 more possessions.
Right.
In the NHL, that was literally goal 1 of maybe 1 for the entire night. It was a 0-0 game. And they wiped it off the board because of a ref's mistake. That just cannot happen on that stage in the Stanley Cup final. And it's just a killer for the Preds that it did.
There was a whole lot of bad things I saw in the whole series. I mean, the one thing where dude was bashing Subban's head in the ice like that, and the guy was standing right behind him watching it, you know, and I thought, surely to goodness they're going to say something about that, but they just looked the other way, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's unbelievable. I think there's a lot of room for criticism of the referees throughout the Stanley Cup playoffs, not just in this final. I thought they were very shaky throughout. I think they have a very difficult job in the NHL. It moves so fast that to be out there on the ice, I see how you miss things. I get that. But the officiating left a lot to be desired throughout the entire playoffs. And in the finals, I think it just illustrated some of the problems of the goals. We talked before about the offsides in Game 1. I mean, that's a huge sequence in this series. The Predators were the better team for the large part of Game 1. They had a goal nullified there that would have given them an early lead. If they win that game, it changes the complexion of the series.
I guess you're right about that, yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. Like I say, I'm studying this, and once again, before I get off, I want to tell you again how much I appreciate how knowledgeable you were, and you helped me out, and all the studying. It was great, and I do appreciate you being there, and I enjoy listening to your great show, man. Thank you.
Well, thanks, David. We appreciate the call. Thanks for listening. Thanks for calling in, and I'm excited that there are a bunch of people like David that are out there watching this, and they're getting excited about hockey because it's a great sport. And as I talked about earlier, there's so many things right about the Stanley Cup playoffs in terms of the action and the sport itself and the dedication and the things that guys do to put it on the line to win the Stanley Cup. It's just different than what you see in the NBA playoffs. To me, it's what makes this the best test in terms of playoffs in all of sports. The Stanley Cup is the hardest one to win. It is so grueling, it is so grinding, and it is so long. And to me, it's just so exciting to watch. But at the same time, if you're a fan of hockey, the rules are frustrating because of just what we talked about, the impact it makes. And unfortunately, every game in the Stanley Cup playoffs, generally, you're talking about 1-2 goal types of games. Having goals wiped off the board just cannot happen because of mistakes by officials, because goals themselves are so few and far between and hard to get. And it's just unfortunate. Again, the Penguins, to me, were the better team in the series. They deserved to win the Stanley Cup. But gosh, it hurts when you have a couple goals taken away, because the way I looked at it, the Preds to win the series had to play great. And they also needed some things to happen. They could not afford to be unlucky or have a bad bounce here or there. And what happened in this series is the Penguins got some bounces. They got a couple of calls. And the Preds played really well, maybe not as great as they had to. And you throw all of that together, and it really took any chance they had of pulling the upset and winning the series away. I think full strength with Ron Johansson, Kevin Fiala, and all those, it's a different series. And you don't need the luck, you don't need the calls quite in the same way. But when you're down for the majority of the series, 3 of your top 9 forwards, that's tough. You need a break somewhere along the way, and the Preds just didn't get it. We got to take a break. Phone lines are still open. 737-7767 is the number. Back after this, you're watching SportsLine on News Channel 5+.